All right, what is going on, podcast peeps? My name is Tyler Bruner, and hey, welcome back to yet another episode of Beyond the Broadcast. And happy Friday to all of you. Hopefully you're getting your day started off right, or ending your day off right by listening to us here on Beyond the Broadcast. Man, 7 episodes, here we finally are. One of my most anticipated episodes I think I have ever released. This is going to be such a fun interview with such a special guest. I mean, this guy that we're talking to today, so gracious with his time, so great. But before we talk about our guest here today, just want to ask one little teensy favor. Wherever you are listening to this podcast here for today, can I ask you just to follow the podcast, leave a review, whatever that might include. That helps me out so much to get better guests, bigger guests, and of course, to make this podcast better. I have so many awesome interviews lined up with a lot more people from a lot more different career paths, not just sports, not just broadcasting. We've got some more marketing people coming up here soon. And I know the tone of this podcast has changed ever so slightly. It went from sports people originally. I was going to do more sports, but I'm like, you know what? There's a lot more interesting careers out there. So we've got some marketing people, we've got photographers, we've got all walks of life to just talk about how cool their careers are. And if you are interested about getting into those careers, there you go. It's just an awesome resource to use. All right, all that rambling aside, we've got such an amazing guest. I'm still a little bit in awe that this guest was so gracious with his time and wanted to be on the podcast. I am so over the moon about this, but it is James Beard, not the culinary James Beard, different James Beard. This James is a 40-year plus veteran as a professional wrestling referee, and he's done just about everything. And he is going to talk about his story in this episode about how he got into professional wrestling, because originally he was in a band and was happy being in a band until Bruiser Brody is like, you need to be in wrestling. You need to do this ref stuff. Bruiser Brody kind of said, you're going to do it. And so there he was doing his thing, and it's taken him everywhere. He has worked over in Japan, especially during the time when the WWF was coming over and doing tours in Japan. He's worked with the WWF. I mean, you name it, and he's just about done it. But the biggest thing that he's done recently is that he was in the A24 film, The Iron Claw, not only as a referee on screen, but behind the scene, he was working with the actors to make sure that they were portraying as accurate of a character as possible. Because, I mean, they were portraying real people. So when the Freebirds and the Von Erichs were fighting in the movie, there was a part where James came in and he's like, no. This is what the Von Erichs would have done in this situation. Same thing with Ric Flair. I mean, he was really responsible for developing the character. Chavo Guerrero, he was the wrestling guy, right? James Beard was the historian in a lot of context here. So James talks about all of his experiences with the Iron Claw and how awesome that was. And of course, we talk about the Hall of Fame weekend coming up in Waterloo, Iowa this July. We'll get more details on that. And even a match he had with Bruce Pritchard. Yes, that Bruce Pritchard. And yes, he had a match with him. We'll talk about all of that and more in this episode. So if you enjoy our conversation, please make sure you like the content, you give James some love. And well, enough about all this rambling. Let's get right to some wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, this is 40-year professional wrestling referee and, might I add, movie star. This, my friends, is James Beard. I am so excited to be joined by today's guest. He's someone who I think has done so much in the pro wrestling world, and he might not admit it, but he's a little bit of a movie star. This is Mr. James Beard. James, thank you so much for taking some time out your busy day to be with us here today.
My pleasure, Tyler. Good to be with you.
Man, I tell you what, this is going to be one heck of a cool interview, and I got to ask you because you have done so much in so many places of the pro wrestling world. But I got to ask you, because there's a lot of famous mustaches in the world of professional wrestling. When did you just start growing this mustache of yours?
Well, I actually had a little goatee, and And my wife kept telling me, she said, I want you to cut it, and I want you to do the thing here, the Fu Manchu or whatever you call it. And when your wife tells you something, you just do it. It's that simple. I personally, probably not my number one preference, but it is what it is. So I live with it.
It's kind of giving a little bit of Magnum PI, you know what I mean? Jake the Snake Roberts. I like it, man.
Well, good. I mean, it's kind of grown on me, I guess, a little bit after a while. But yeah, I stayed clean shaven for a long, long time, and then you get older, you try to hide as much of this as you can. so I had a goatee for a while, and then she came up with this idea, and what am I going to say? No,
Yeah, exactly. Well, James, yeah. I tell you what, I think there's a lot of wrestling fans that might not know where you've come from. I think their most recognizable part of you was in your role in the Iron Claw. So I want to talk about just your beginnings in pro wrestling. Talk to me, just give me a little synopsis of how you got into the business, man.
Well, I got into the business. I was playing music, basically, and around the Dallas area. Got to know a lot of the boys that worked in the business at the Sportatorium, and eventually, the subjects come up. You start talking to them, and I'd watched wrestling all my life, and kind of had a clue, and they just started kind of pushing me toward doing it, and eventually I finally gave in and said, well, I'll see how it feels, and tried it a little bit, and it kind of took, it was just kind of a natural thing for me. I felt real comfortable with it. So, and it wasn't very long before I was just in demand, and I had to make a choice. So it became my life.
Yeah, and from other interviews I've heard you do, it sounds like Bruiser Brody was one of those guys that really got you and kind of threw you into the business. So yeah. How did Bruiser Brody approach you? Did you approach him? What was that conversation kind of like?
No, I didn't approach him. I mean, he was one of those guys that kind of hung around a little bit once in a while, and when you start talking to him, he's a very, very intelligent guy and very insightful, and it just kind of hit it off. And he basically kind of threw me in the water. He just said, "Hey, you're going to do this," and then Bruiser tells you something, you probably ought to try it, So I did. He was very influential to start with. And I worked, some local things and some indie stuff just to get a feel for it. And then the next thing I know, I'm working in Dallas at Sportatorium. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, of course, one of the things we'll talk about when we get into the Iron Claw, the Sportatorium, and how they recreated that. Talk to me about those first few matches. What was it kind of like to kind of get in there and learn the ropes in real time?
Well, it was kind of weird. Honestly, I was never nervous because I'd been fronting a band for years, so I'd been in front of people, so that wasn't a problem. It felt very natural to me from the very beginning. I kind of knew what to do, basically, and of course there were many things that I found out I didn't know as time went by. But and I tell people all the time, I learned more listening than I ever learned in the ring, and that was one thing that was easy for me because I was a little bit more mature when I started than some guys are, and so listening was a big thing for me. I just kind of absorbed everything I could from it. And my goal when I got into the business was not necessarily to always be a referee. It was to be in the creative side of things and be involved in more things other than just in the ring. And of course, eventually that became what happened. But it was, it was a process of learning, but it was also really easy for me to do because it just felt natural.
Yeah, and the one thing I loved that you said on another podcast, and I wish I could remember which one it was because there was two of them I listened to in preparation for this, but you mentioned something about you learned more listening than doing, and I think that's it carries more weight than inside the squared circle, but that carries weight outside in life, and I think that's just an important lesson for people who in any profession needs to learn.
Oh, absolutely. And this is really a unique profession, a unique business, and there's a lot of little intricate things that you don't really pick up by just watching, and a lot of things that you probably don't pick up by being in the ring because you're so busy trying to just get through the match. So, I spent my time, when I was at the Sportatorium, I'd get there early. I'd sit around and talk to whoever happened to be there, and we had a plethora of veterans that would show up. Of course, Skandar Akbar, who became a dear friend, was kind of a mentor, and Johnny Valentine, Red Bastine, and you never knew. I mean, there might be any assortment of veterans that might show up and just kind of sit around and talk, before the matches, and I picked up a lot just by doing that, just by being there. And then of course, eventually, you're riding in the cars with those guys, especially with Akbar, and all those miles, and you just have to learn if you pay attention.
And that's a big thing too about just anything. I have a friend of mine, well, I guess a former boss of mine who, got through high school, did his thing, was in college for a little bit, but the biggest thing that he teaches kids whenever he has the chance, or just young adults, is communication is so key in whatever you do in life, whether you're a mechanic or whether you're a professional wrestling referee. Communication and learning how to be an effective communicator is such an important life skill to learn.
And it's almost a lost art sometimes. I think communication between individuals now is really, strained because so many people are spending so much time on their phones and playing games or whatever they're doing, and social media and that kind of thing. And I think we lose that art sometimes, and that ability to communicate and understand when you communicate, and wrestling really is all about that. That's what it is. It's about communicating an idea or a feeling. And that's one of the things I think that's lost in wrestling now. You lose that emotional investment in fans because we're not communicating with them. We're just doing things. A lot of matches I see these days it's all action, and they don't really create. They might get a reaction, but they're not really creating that emotional investment in the fans, and that's all about communication.
And I'm glad you jumped ahead a little bit to that, because I had just listened to the Wrestling Nostalgia podcast you were just on, and you talked about that, the lost art of the psychology of matches and the communication aspect. When do you think that shifted? Was it the early 90s? When do you think that shift in wrestling really happened?
Yeah, it started to then. The territory started dying off, and a lot of the guys left the business. A lot of the experienced guys left the business. And, it used to be that coming up in this business, you always work with people who are more experienced, maybe even better than you. And that's how you learned. You learned every aspect of it. So I kind of blame that my generation of guys, because we kind of left everything hanging, and there was a whole generation, maybe two generations by now, of guys who came up and just all they knew was what they thought they knew about the business, and some of those guys became trainers, some of them became workers, promoters, all of that kind of thing, and you still see the effects of it now because they had this vision of how you do this based on just that fan's idea of things, instead of a worker, instead of a professional idea of things. And I see that now. I see it in the major promotions. The whole booking aspect of it, the whole creative aspect of it is basically that same thing, and it really is a shame because wrestling in its best sense, as far as I'm concerned, creates that connection with fans and that emotion we talked about. And I don't see that happening now.
It really does. And I think there's a lot of people, at least nowadays, that really think that wrestling is back in the public eye. It's back. It's wrestling is cool again. And it's interesting to hear what you say, because I think some of the gripes that people have, especially with like AEW or New Japan, is it's all these big high flying action, but you don't get that storytelling aspect that you might have gotten during the territory days, late 80s, early 90s.
Yes, I see these guys rating these matches, have 5 stars or whatever it is, that which is all, it's all an opinion anyway. But yeah, basically what it amounts to is when I see the ones that they get all excited about are the ones that generally are the ones that have the most extreme, I guess, extreme spots, stunts, that kind of thing. And it's not about that emotional thing, not about telling a story in the ring. You hear a lot of old timers talking about tell that story, develop the story, get the ebb and flow in there. And then that's true. That's one thing that's missing. And I tell a lot of the young guys that I work with now, if you'll go into one of these promotions and perform your match that way with that in mind, develop the match, bring it up and down, have that emotional connection, it'll stand out because it's different from everything else. And that's really, that's the thing that's missing. And that's why I can't watch a lot of the modern wrestling today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do want to get back in talking about your early days of stuff, because I think when people hear the Sportatorium, especially if they're around my age, they kind of scratch their head and have no clue what you're talking about. So you, if I understand correctly, we're down in Texas in that territory, a lot of really huge names coming from that. So talked about just the territory of Texas, what it was like, and kind of what that experience was like back in the day.
Well, I mean, in those days, it was the territory system was basically you had a promotion that kind of like the home base of a promotion or a home base of a territory, and they would have certain towns that they frequented and booked and went to on a regular basis, and plus there'd be a lot of little what we call spot shows in between those kinds of things. But you'd usually have a major city like Dallas. And then you have Fort Worth and Austin and San Antonio and and Corpus Christi, Houston. And the guys that was a weekly thing every week. They make that run, which you're working 6 nights a week, 7 nights a week, sometimes twice on one day. So at times. So that was the territory system, and everything was homegrown. You had your own heroes, you had your own champions, you had the fans were very intimately and involved in whether they loved or hated this guy or that guy, and it was really a very personal connection for fans. The Texas territory was one. Of course, Texas had like four different ones. They had the Dallas territory, which was those towns, and then out in the Funk territory in Amarillo, there were towns there that actually got out of Texas in some cases. In El Paso, and in San Antonio, eventually Joe Blanchard went down there and started his own, and so every one of those bases had different towns that they kind of covered. And everybody kind of stayed out of everybody else's territory. Just kind of a thing with the promoters. So it was very personal. There's a lot of pride involved. The Texas fans had a lot of pride in world class, or Southwest Sports, which is what it was until they changed the name. But and that was the same. That was true in Georgia or Tennessee or anywhere, that had a territory. So, it would, I think the local connection really kind of made it special, and in those days, of course, you had it wasn't one world champion, but each organization that kind of covered all these territories had a world champion, and he would travel from one promotion to the next or one territory to the next, and it was a kind of a special thing. I think it was a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and you got to see kind of the last efforts of the territories kind of happened. So what were the emotions like in the locker room and within yourself when you kind of knew that the territory days were over and, WWE, WCW were really taking over?
It was, I think on the business side of it, there was a lot of fear. There were, a lot of protection there. Texas was hard to take over for Vince. He came in and tried to, even after Hogan was popular. He came in several times and tried, and it just wasn't kind of going with him because it was a different style. It was kind of Texas has always been a real hard hitting, you can't see through it type style of wrestling. And it was a different thing, for a lot of wrestling fans. And they didn't take to it very well. It took them a while. And in fact, I think until Vince convinced Fritz to kind of join in and Kerry to kind of join in, I don't think they really got a stronghold here. So there was a lot of pride in the territories. That was part of that. And there was a time there when you could kind of see the writing on the wall and things were kind of going down, and a lot of the talent was leaving, or the really good talent was getting swallowed up by WWE or Elf at the time, and WCW, whatever, Crockett's promotion. So you could kind of see what was going on, and some of the territories hung on for a little while. Like in Dallas, we had Global, USWA and Global, and then in Memphis, of course, USWA hung on for a lot of years. So there were still some out there that were fighting the fight, but it was a tough fight because of the cable exposure.
Yeah.
And there was a time when you could see the attendance start to go down, and you kind of see how it was coming, but and it was a little depressing. I was a little lucky because a lot during that time frame, I was working in Japan a lot, so I kind of had that to lean on. A lot of guys didn't have that. And then, like I said, they started to scatter. They started to find other jobs because they couldn't work 7 nights a week anymore, and we can make a living in the business. And a lot of them became kind of 2 or 3 night guys, and it was tough. It was a tough thing.
Hey, what's going on, podcast peeps? It is Tyler Brunner, the host and creator of Beyond the Broadcast, and I am beyond happy that you are enjoying today's episode. And if you are, and if you want to see more of Beyond the Broadcast, of course, the easiest way to support us is by following us on your preferred podcast platform and following us on all of our social channels. You can find those in the description of today's episode. All right, we got some more lo-fi hip-hop and plenty of more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next. I'm glad you brought up your exposure in Japan, because when I was talking with James Jeffries, he mentioned just the uniqueness that it was of you as an American-born individual going to Japan and being a referee. Talk to me about how that came to be, and I also want to ask you about that first match, that submission match that you had reffed in the difficulties within that.
Yeah, well, it kind of just happened. I had come to know Kendo Nagasaki. Kazu Sakurada is his real name. But Kendo worked in the Texas territory a lot, and he was around, and I'd worked with him quite a bit. And he was one of those guys that it was kind of hard to read, because you really didn't know if he liked you or not. He was just kind of. I think some of it was he was never real sure of his English. He could speak pretty good, but I think he was a little insecure about it. So he kind of came across as being a little bit put offish, I guess. But I was around him a lot. I had friends that knew him real well, and we would sit around and talk and that kind of thing. And he usually just sit there and listen, And we were at a match one night, and I was just standing next to him watching what was going on in the ring, and 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 he just looked down at me. He said, "You have passport?" And I went, well, "Yeah." He said, well, "Okay, you go to Japan." That's simple. And I thought, okay, I thought that was, I mean, yeah, who's going to say no? Because in those days, going to Japan was a special deal. I mean, you had to be on top of your game, and there'd been referees that go over there do tours and special shows and that kind of thing. So, that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking, I'm going to go over there, and then this deal he had going on, they wanted to make a big deal out of it. It was a two-night thing, and so I'm going over there thinking I'm going over there for 2 nights, but I can say I went to Japan. It's a big deal. So it was that simple. That's how it happened. And going over there and working those 2 nights, that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking I'm going to do this. I'm going to make I think I made $800 or something for 2 nights. And I didn't care. I'd have probably done it for nearly nothing just to go, but it was a big deal. And yeah, you're right. That first match, I thought, I'm going to go over here and work with all the American guys that they're bringing, or they had some guys from Canada and some from Europe. But I thought I'm going to work with all the gaijin, Well, Kabuki, who was one of the bookers, came up to me before the matches. He said, "Okay, you have this match and this match." And the first match was 2 Japanese guys. One of them was Wakamatsu, who was an older guy. This was going to be his retirement match, really. He'd been managing some. He'd been around a long time, well known, and a younger guy. And I said, "Okay." No, neither one of them could speak English. I said, "Well, what's finish?" "All submission." I went, "Okay, who?" "Well, I don't know." What? So I go down to the ring, and I'm in the ring with these 2 guys that I don't know. Both can't speak English, and it's a submission match. And and I'm thinking, all I can do is, try to make sure it's obvious he's submitting, and that's it. Well, during the match, the younger guy kicked Wakamatsu in the jaw, and it broke it. And he was like hanging down like this. I mean, literally hanging. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I kept asking him, "You give up? You give up?" "No. And I'm like, he'd shake his head, and I'm like, So, okay. So we kept on and kept on and kept on. And finally, Wakamatsu got him in a rear naked, and the younger guy, and he started submitting. I could obvious, and I called for the bell, and I evidently did the right thing. It was I'm not sure at the time. So I go back to the dressing room, and Jeff Jarrett, that was his first trip to Japan too, and he said, "What was that?" And I said, "Brother, I don't know. All I know is," he said, "Was that for real?" And I said, "Well, you saw his jaw hanging down. That was for real." I said, "Yeah, everything in there was real." So all the boys in the dressing room, all the guys that I was there with, they all got jacked up about that, Fatu and Little Sam, they were ready to kill somebody, and they were excited, but that was my first match, and I got through it, and then I had another match, was a tag match with Bob Orton and Jeff against Kinyu and Kabuki. And that went well. I mean, it was it was a little more traditional, and so I just worked the way I worked at home. I didn't know any other way to do that. And then the second night in the same building, same thing. I got to work a couple of matches that night, and when I went back to the dressing room, the business manager, who's still a dear friend of mine today, he came over to me and said, "Mr. Tanaka wants to see you in the production room." That was the money guy, the main man. I thought, well, what did I do wrong? I walked in there, and he walked up to me, and he goes, "Ikiban referee," and I had no clue what he was saying. And he stuck his hand out there and shook my hand, and there was like $500 in this. I didn't know how much it was. I mean, it was nothing in that it amounted to about $500. And I thought, you know, I walked back in the dressing room, and Bob Orton's laying on the table, taking a nap before his match, like he would do sometimes. And he said, "Well, I think you got over." And I had no idea. Had no idea.
Wow.
And so I go to get paid, and Kabuki's paying us like they do in the $100 bills and that kind of thing. And after I got paid, I thanked him, and he said, "Okay, you come back next month." I went, "Really?" "Oh yeah, you're just you and Japanese boys only." And from then on, I was there. I was part of the company.
Wow.
And as far as I know, I'm the only foreign referee that's ever actually worked for a Japanese wrestling company. I mean, not as part of the crew.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And what promotion was this once again?
That was SWS.
SWS.
Yeah. It was kind of a breakaway from Kenyu took a bunch of guys from New Japan and Baba and created his own promotion. And eventually they ended up with an agreement with WWF. So I ended up in that situation too, although I was working for the Japanese company, but I was also working with WWF at the same time. So it was kind of cool. It ended up splitting because a lot of the older guys didn't like that agreement. That the original concept of SWS was supposed to be strong style. And I mean real strong style, not what they're calling it today. I'm talking about really, really rugged stuff, and some of the guys weren't happy with that, and they ended up splitting. And when it split, Sakurada took some guys, and of course I was loyal to him, and I went with him, which turned out good for me because he gave me an opportunity to book and book talent and book the matches and finishes and that kind of thing, and it worked out really well for me. But yep, it was quite an experience. So I worked over there on and off for about 7 years.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think one of the unique things too is you were in Texas and the territories. You're in Japan. Those are two, I don't want to say completely different styles, but very hard-nosed, hard-hitting styles. So even though you never were on the receiving end of any of these things, which wrestlers hit harder, Texas or Japan?
It was very similar, very similar. And that's one of the reasons I think I felt comfortable, because it was the whole thing over there was is kind of a catch can kind of thing, act and react. And in Texas, that's kind of what we were doing. And you didn't see through things in Texas. You had guys here that were just as I guess tight working, if you want to put it that way, as anybody in the business. And that was just a style here. And plus by then, you in Texas, you had the influence of the Von Erich boys, and you had those guys that kind of you can say what you will, but they really kind of changed the business in a way. They were big guys who could fly around and do things that a lot of big guys weren't doing at the time. So I was getting that kind of thing in Japan too. And it was very comfortable for me because the styles really were very similar. I mean, the languages and some of the customs were very different, but once I got in the ring, it was really cool.
Yeah. And I think some people will look at your thing, because it was when I had found you on Facebook, you had this laundry list of places that you worked for and people that you worked for, but you've had the chance to really be in the ring with some true legends of the game. So who are some of those individuals that people today might recognize?
Oh my gosh! I mean, if you're talking about in Texas, I worked with all those names, all the Von Erichs and the Bruiser Brodies and the Abdullah the Butcher and gosh, I mean, everybody you recognize with Texas at some point in time, I've been in the ring with them probably. And in Japan, I mean, I got the opportunity. Like I said, I was working with that group that had the agreement with WWF. So I was working with all the top WWF stars too. Randy Savage, Hogan, Rick Martel, Shawn Michaels, you name it. They all came over there, and I got, and it was a really kind of a unique situation for me because on a tour like that, it's not like working in the States where you show up at the arena and you do your thing and then you go home. You're living together. You get to know each other. So I had a really special opportunity there to kind of get to know a lot of those guys a lot better than I might have otherwise. And it was really cool, and they brought all their top stars over. So, if you go back to the late 80s, early 90s and start naming all the top guys that were in WWF, I worked with them all just about.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
and of course, I go home and work with all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And had the opportunity to go to Germany and work over there. And it was just, it's incredible. I've been incredibly blessed as far as that goes.
And talking about, you had the opportunity to kind of get to know these guys on a deep personal level in Japan whenever they come over. Who are some of those guys that you had the opportunity to live with over during those tours?
Well, like I just named some of them. Like Shawn. I was around Shawn because he and Marty were tagging together during that time. And I can remember a night he had already been kind of talking about wanting to go on his own. And there was a night when we had finished, and Shawn and I ended up back in the hotel a little bit earlier than everybody else. So we went and we were drinking a couple of cold ones and just talking. And we talked about that, about what his plans were and how he wanted to, kind of go off on his own, see how that would turn out for him. So I got a little insight there. And then of course, eventually that's exactly what happened. And it's just cool to be able to sit down with guys like that and just kind of just be yourself, and they be themselves. They're not putting on an act or anything. They're just talking, and I know, like Shawn, for example, a lot of guys, later on, he had kind of a reputation of being a little bit of a troubled guy, and a little full of himself. And I'm sure that was true. But my experience with him was totally different. Like Randy Savage, the same thing. Randy came over there. He was unhappy when he got there. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was something about the way he was used in a pay-per-view and probably a payoff. I think that was when Vince was trying to do some other things, and some of the money was going to other things, and he thought that they were getting shorted and that kind of deal. But he shows up in Japan. He's really unhappy. And I met him in the hotel, which is what they would do. I'd do a tour and work in the training center. And then when the next tour came, they would take me to the hotel where the guys were coming in, and I'd travel with them. So that's what I was doing. And Randy comes in and we get to talking, and we stayed up till like 6 o'clock that night talking about this, that, and the other. And then he was like, well, if I'm going to be here, I want to make it mean something. So we came up with this angle for him, involved with Tenyu and Haku and Yatsu, and anyway, it was an angle that we came up with, that he and I came up with, and he said, I'm going to take this to the office, and they're going to have to do it. I mean, that's the way it was, and he took it to the office. He told them about it. They loved it, and he insisted that I get credit for it with him. And work it. And so he really was very influential in me getting involved in the creative side of things over there. Because after that, it worked really well. The angle worked really well. And they started coming to me for finishes and ideas and that kind of thing. And of course, when Sakurada broke off, then I was doing a lot of that. So, and that carried over to the States. Because they hear everything you're doing here and there. That's all rumors and stuff. And so Randy had a huge impact on my career, and just in that little short amount of time. And I had such a positive situation with him. And and I know he's known as being one of these guys that goes off the handle sometimes, But with me, it was a totally different deal. And that's what I loved about it, because I had a different kind of relationship with them.
Yeah.
But that's just a couple of examples. But there were a lot of Haku. I mean, I brought him up. I got to tell you, man, he's one of my best friends still today. And he took me to things and showed me things in the culture over there in Japan that I'd have never had the opportunity to do without him and his influence. And we were very tight. You know, we spent a lot of time together over there. And, you know, everybody talks about this as the baddest man in the business. And to me, he was the most gentle, kindest, sweetest guy I'd ever known, you know, still is. You know, so I just had such a great, unique situation that I really appreciate.
And, you know, it must feel great. Your inner child must be grinning from ear to ear. The fact that you got into the business, you're kind of thrown into the business, but you've had so many experiences over decades and decades of doing this. I mean, your inner child must be so happy that you're doing all this stuff.
It's kind of hard to imagine, you know, that. And I can remember as a kid, you know, I watched wrestling. My folks took me to the Sportatorium a couple of times when I was 8 or 9 years old. And that was my first exposure to live wrestling. And I saw Pepper Gomez and Bull Curry and Red Bastien and Danny McShane and Johnny Valentine, you know, on those trips. And eventually I became friends with a lot of those guys and even worked with some of those guys. And it's just to think about that, you know, as a kid, you do all that and see it and watch it on TV, and then you go home and you fantasize about, you know, what if I was involved in that, doing that kind of thing. And I had those fantasies too, just like everybody else does. And then I got off into other things, and I didn't think that would ever happen, but it just kind of came around and happened.
Yeah.
I was telling a guy the other night, we were talking, in fact, John Layfield and I were talking about this one night, and I got to thinking about it. And I don't know how the subject came up and how it got to this, but I was thinking about it. You know, from the moment that I was kind of thrown into the wrestling business to this day, I have never sought out one single position or one single booking. Never. I've never sought out anything, and it just happened. So it's, you know, I can only explain it like it was meant to be.
Yeah.
You know,
it was in the stars. You were meant to do it, and you did it.
That's all I can say, you know, and that's not a brag. That's just the way it's worked.
Hey, what's going on, podcast peeps? It is Tyler Bruner back hanging out with you once again. We've got another break here on the podcast, so make sure you get on up, you stretch your legs, get some of your favorite drinks, your favorite snacks, because we got plenty more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next. If you are enjoying this show, just make sure you follow us on your preferred podcast platform, because that's how we're going to grow the show. That's how we're going to get more guests, and it's just going to be a lot more awesome for many more episodes to come. Also, make sure you follow us, subscribe to our social channels. You can find those in the description of this episode. All right, we got some more lo-fi hip-hop and plenty more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next. You know, and talking about, you know, all these opportunities you had another one kind of, I don't want to say fall in your lap in a way, but you had one come your way. Of course, I'm talking about the Iron Claw. Spectacular movie. It's such what the wrestler did when it did with Mickey Rourke, this movie really has done such a great job telling a story that's in a lot of ways tragic, but in a lot of ways really awesome. I want to see how that kind of came to be, because I know that you were taking a little bit of a break from the wrestling business, and then this kind of came to you, and I think you played a really awesome part, not just on screen in the Iron Claw, but also behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, and you know, I was still doing a few things, but not much. In fact, I was going. A friend of mine, Dapper Dan from GWF, Danny Davis, has a group of students in Louisiana, and I had been going down there about once a month and working with those guys for him, and just kind of, I mean, very green guys, you know, learning, just starting to learn. And I was on my way down there for one of those. This was in 22, sometime early in the year. And Tim Storm gave me a call, which was not unusual because Tim and I are very, very close. And he said, Luke Hawks had called him. And Luke had been involved in a lot of movies and TV shows, doing stunt coordinations and that kind of thing. And he was involved in the casting of the Iron Claw for the wrestling talent. And I hadn't seen Luke in a while, but Tim said he had asked him if I might be interested. Luke thought that having somebody who was actually there, and knew the Von Erichs and the Freebirds and all those guys might be interesting to have involved in the movie. And I said, yeah, tell Luke to call me. And then, like I said, another one of those things that just happened. And so Luke did, and I told him, sure. I said, I'd be more than happy to. And the next thing I know, I'm getting vetted by A24, and which is interesting. You got to go through all of this stuff, man. They want to make sure you're not some kind of criminal or sex addict or whatever. I don't know what, but you go through all this stuff, to make sure that you're an okay guy. And I went through all of that, did all that, and then I got the call to show up here. And at Baton Rouge is where it was. And so I go down there and walk on set, and I walk to look around, and they've created a little mini version of the Sportatorium. And I thought, oh my gosh, I almost cried. It looked so real, and then I met Shawn Durkin that day and talked to him a little bit and kind of got an idea of what he wanted from me and what we were doing. And of course, Chavo Guerrero Jr. was coordinating the wrestling, and I'd known Chavo for a while and knew all of his family, worked with all of his family. And we talked a little bit, and he said, I want you to help, with these guys, when you've been there, all these guys, if they give them some advice, tell them, this guy would do this thing this way, or walk this way, or talk this way, or whatever. And so they gave me a lot of leeway in doing that. And Shawn Durkin would shoot a scene, and he would tell me, call me to the monitor and say, did this look right? And I'm like, there's just this big time director asking me if this looked right. I'm going, yeah, that looks great. And that's one of the things that we took very seriously, is getting the wrestling scenes right. And I think they're the best wrestling scenes I've ever seen in a movie. I really do. And that's not just because I was in it. I really believe that. And they were very realistic the way we did it. So, that process was very interesting. I was down there off and on for a little over a month. And of course, we're sitting here waiting for another year before the movie comes out, and everybody's, all the rumors and everything. And it was kind of one of those times when you're going like, I just wish this thing would come out. I want to see what it looks like, because I'd get bits and pieces of the script. I didn't really know what the whole story was. I had an idea that it was Kevin's story, and as it turns out, I was pretty close to right. Obviously, there's some historical things in there that aren't 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. Timelines aren't 100% accurate, but it's impossible to do in 2 hours and however many minutes. You can't do it. But I think the story, if you look at it from that perspective, that this is really about Kevin, about how he handled being the older brother and kind of overlooked, and dealing with the family dynamic and all the tragedies, and then also creating a relationship with Pam, all that time. And it was his story. And that's what I told him. I talked to him about a week ago on the phone. And then we were talking about the movie a little bit, and he said, the only thing that disturbed him a little bit is he thought it was a little harsh about his dad, and it was kind of hard on him, and of course Fritz wasn't really that. He wasn't really as bad as the movie made him look to be. Sure. But otherwise, and I told him, I said, Kevin, I said, I understand that, but and we both know that some of the things in there aren't accurate, but this is your story. And just be happy that they got that story out there, because it was pretty accurate, as far as his emotional state and the things he dealt with and that kind of thing. So I was really proud of it. I got to go to the premiere, walk the it was actually one a red carpet. It was a green carpet, but that's okay. My wife and my son got to go with me, and they were got to walk it with me, and we got to watch the movie, and I'm sitting there. The first time I saw it at the premiere, it was like so excited about the whole thing. I was just reliving shooting it, and then a couple when it came out for the public, I got to go see it with a bunch of friends and all. I kind of relaxed and watched it, and it's really a good movie.
Yeah, it really is a fantastic movie. And again, it's not a documentary. It's very much not really. It takes elements from the real story. But the thing that I love, and I know that you don't call yourself a movie star, even though you look fantastic in that movie. You look like an 80s referee through and through. But what was the family reaction like? What was kind of the little ones and everyone's reaction to see you on the silver screen?
Oh, it was a pop. It was a big pop. I've been getting a lot of reaction from friends, and the funny thing about it is that here at home I live close to Tyler, Texas, in East Texas. All those years I was in the business, I was around living out of Dallas mostly, and so a lot of my personal friends and people that I know now and they really don't know the whole history of what I've been involved in. They may know a little bits and pieces and stuff, but not to the extent, And all and all of a sudden, I started getting a few of the Hall of Fame things and some accolades and some attention on, and there's a lot of them that are kind of like, I had no idea, and it's just something I didn't go around talking about a lot, and it's kind of out there now, especially with the movie. It's just, everybody knows. It's kind of, but it's been eye opening to me. I can tell you that, but it's been in a good way. It's been a lot of fun. I don't, you're right. I don't consider myself a movie star, but I kid about it. A guy saw, I did an autograph signing last week, and a friend of mine who's actually in the movie business, in New York, he's always, we kidding back and forth a lot about things, but he said he saw the table I was at, had all these pictures and stuff. And he said, since when do referees get a merch table? And I told him, I said, I'm not a referee anymore. I'm a friggin' movie star.
There you go.
So it's something I kid around about, but I don't take it that seriously. It was fun. I enjoy it. I'm very proud of it. Mm-hmm. And, I would do it again in a minute, but I still understand, that I was just a very small part of the whole thing.
But, I think one of the cool things about your aspect of it is that obviously you were able to relive some of these matches that happened, and that you knew the mannerisms of some of these wrestlers, and from the sounds of it, the actors who portrayed these people, especially Zac Efron playing Kevin, they really took it to heart to know the mannerisms, how they acted, how they talked, how they walked. So talk to me about Zac's development, because obviously he trained with Chavo for the majority of this, but you were really the character builder in a lot of ways. So what was Zac's kind of learning throughout this process of learning who Kevin was and how he was?
Well, it was very easy because I knew Kevin. Kevin and I we used to ride together. I know I've worked with them so many times, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, and I just I was very familiar with everything they did, how they moved, how they reacted to things. And the real positive situation about it all is that all the actors who were playing the Von Erichs, especially, and Ric Flair and all that, they were so receptive to all those things. They didn't have that movie star attitude that you hear about sometimes. They were all not only willing, but really, really looking for advice, because wrestling was a foreign thing to them. But they did all the spots I mean, we had guys there showing them how to do it. But when we shot the scenes, they did the spots from start to finish. And you're right, some of those were directly recreated, from history, especially the Freebird things and all that. Zach, Zach came to me several times, about, how would he do this, and how would Kevin react to this, and I told him about the one thing, when we did that one scene where the Freebirds are they're outside and kind of rushing the ring. That when we started doing it, kind of going over it and everything, they all kind of stood back waiting for them. And I said, no, guys. I said, the Von Erich boys, especially Kevin, he would run right over me to get to him. I'd have to fight him to keep him back, So we those kinds of things, were they just enough to get their real personality involved. And they were just all really willing to listen to that and do it. The last scene I did was the Flair scene. And after it was all over with, I finished and I got out of the ring and I was about to leave. And this was really special for me. I walked around to say goodbye to Sean Durkin and some of the other guys that were there, some of the crew. And Sean told the assistant director to make an announcement on the microphone that was my route, that was it. So she did that. And when she did that, there was a big reaction from the crew and everybody, and I thanked them and I started to turn around to walk off and Zach came back out of the back. Gave me a big hug and thanked me for helping him. So that was the kind of relationship and attitude they had. It was just a great experience.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything negative about it.
And, and it's such a positive light. I mean, obviously it's a tragic story, but this really sheds a really great light, and hopefully there's potential in the future for other families like the Guerreros to get a spotlight on their family, because I think more than anything, yes, it is a movie about wrestling, but it's really a story about a family within wrestling and tells the deeper things. So do you feel like that there's some room in the future for other wrestling stories to be told on the big screen?
Oh, absolutely. And I've heard rumors that there may be some coming up. And I tell people all, from seeing the movie and from my experience in working in it, it's really not a wrestling movie. It's got wrestling in it, and it's about a wrestling family. But the movie is really not about wrestling itself. It's Kevin's story, and like I said, like I told him, I said, they got a lot of it right. That part of it, the emotional part and that kind of thing. And I mean, you can nitpick all kinds of stuff in it, I mean, it may look like Kevin, like Pam was chasing Kevin. It was actually the other way around. That was one thing. But and Pam in real life she's an amazing lady. It really is. I was glad they kind of put it over that she kind of held things together, and she really has done that. She really did do that. The little things and details. I mean, he had two girls before he had those two boys. And that wasn't in the movie. And of course, David had a daughter that was another tragedy. He had a daughter that died at 2 months. From the instant death, infant death syndrome or something like that. I can't. There's a term for it, but 2-month-old. That's another tragedy. And of course, Carrie had two girls that I knew well, and they weren't even mentioned in it, so there's a lot of things that you just couldn't cover.
Yeah.
Just couldn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask you, because I think a lot of people who are around my age might not understand some of the matches that you were in or some of the matches that you ref. So if fans are going back and trying to, I guess, go back from this podcast and go and find you in some of those big matches, what are some of those recognizable matches that people might be able to go back and see you reffing?
Oh, wow. It's hard for me to remember all individual matches. There were a lot of stuff in the Sportatorium where, like in cage matches with Kerry and the Freebirds and that kind of thing. There's a lot of that kind of stuff out there. A lot of Japanese stuff is out there. Some of the some matches that I didn't even know were out on YouTube, but they're there. You can find. I think you just Google my name in wrestling, and you'll find a bunch of videos and stuff or whatever. Um, it was really I had a really weird progression of things when I was working over there at SWS. There was a group. One of the first kind of shoot fight groups was involved in that too. They worked with them. So, I got to work some of the matches that ended up leading into what eventually became Pride, and it just kind of work shoots, that kind of thing. So I got to do some of the first of those, and we also had an agreement with AAA. So we were working with some of the top Mexican wrestlers over there. So the Rockers, when Shawn and Marty were together, some of those matches were incredible over there. I've seen some of those on video. Just here and there, you can Google my name and find a bunch of stuff. But
I'm sure.
It's hard for me to just pick out this match and that match, because that's one of the things people ask you, what's your favorite match? Well, gosh, I don't know. Today it might be this one, and tomorrow it might be another one. I may have forgotten of this other one. And a lot of them are matches that weren't even ever televised. One of the best matches I can ever remember being was a New Japan match with when AJ Styles was champion against Steve Anthony, a Louisiana guy. Incredible match, and just it stands out for me, so, and I don't think it was ever even filmed, but it's just been an interesting ride, man.
Hey, what's going on, podcast peeps? It is Tyler Brunner, the host and creator of Beyond the Broadcast, and I am beyond happy that you are enjoying today's episode. And if you are, and if you want to see more of Beyond the Broadcast, of course, the easiest way to support us is by following us on your preferred podcast platform and following us on all of our social channels. You can find those in the description of today's episode. All right, we got some more lo-fi hip-hop and plenty of more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next. The coolest thing about you, I know that you played a small part in wrestling history, but you're a part of it, and it's really cool to look back to see everything that you've been involved in. But one thing I want to ask you about, because I found this out just recently before we started recording and everything, you've had a few matches with Bruce Pritchard. I want to ask you about those.
Oh my gosh. See? I try to forget some things, and and people bring it up. Yeah. Yeah. That was an Eddie. Oh my gosh. I can't believe it. Eddie Gilbert came up with this idea. He came up to me one day, and he was booking. It was a Global. And he said, I want you to stop refereeing for a while, and I've got this angle idea. And Bruce had been down there. He'd left WWF. So that's a long story too. But anyway, he left for a while, and he was working with us as an announcer, and then he started managing some guys, and we started the angle, by him. He was helping some of his guys, and I reached up and pulled his pants down. I was trying to get him down from the ring apron, and inadvertently pulled his pants down, and of course he had this ungodly bikini underwear on, which was a horrible sight, and of course I laughed at him, and everybody else laughed at him, and then eventually his guys jumped me, and Eddie made the save, and then we started all these matches. We did several different matches, and the blow off was you had to pull the other guy's pants down, and Bill Irwin was a special referee. Thank God I won that one, but not thankfully for everybody having to look at Bruce's ass again, but. John Layfield found out about that. I did that Briscoe and Bradshaw podcast way back, and John had found out about that somehow, and of course he's friends with Bruce also, and he was determined he was going to find a tape of it somewhere. I hope he never does.
Oh man, that's so cool. That's so cool. I tell you what, James, this has been, we've gone, I think, everywhere and anywhere with your career, but you're such a great, kind guy to talk to, and I think at the core, you're just such a great storyteller. I mean, I was sitting here just kind of in awe, you talking about all these big names that I've grown up listening about, and just thank you for being just so awesome.
Well, I've been very fortunate. It's been a great run, man. I like I said, I don't even know how it happened. It just happened.
Yeah.
And when I think about not ever really seeking it out in any way, and I still don't. Just things just kind of come around for some reason. I guess it's just what it just meant to be, I guess. But I try to stay involved still, and in some ways I try to pass it on, to some of the younger guys, and if they want to listen, some of them do, some of them don't. And I'm involved with a promotion, and it's called Texas Style Wrestling, and we're trying to promote that style that we talked about, that you can't see through, and that fans can follow and appreciate for the story and the present way it's presented. As something that'll grab you and keep you interested. And so I'm involved with that. I'm helping to book that and writing the format for the tapings and that kind of thing. We got a brand new facility in Forney, Texas that's unbelievable. We get to work with a lot of my good friends, Jazz, Rodney Mack, Tim Storm, people that I know and trust, and I know they think the same way as I do. So we're making a lot of progress with that promotion right now, and I think in the next year or so we're going to really be doing well with it. We got a whole new network called Tex TV that we're on, and that will be on. It's just a brand new streaming network. It's all Texas content, not just wrestling. It's all kinds of different things, but it's all Texas content. So there's a lot of exciting things going on, and I'm still plugging away at it.
And I think that promotion is really coming into a unique point in wrestling, because independent wrestling really has this revitalization coming through, and wrestlers have understood that they can make a real living through independent wrestling. So I'm so excited to see who you kind of get on the show. Can you give us a tease of who you've got coming through the pipeline?
Well, you're talking about talent wise?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, I'm really kind of excited about it in a little ways. We've got a lot of young guys that are just starting to kind of get to that point to where they're really ready for the spotlight, and then a lot of guys are just kind of working their way up to that. Of course, Rodney is still working with us, Tim's still working with us, and everybody knows those guys. We've got our women's champion is Christy James, who's been around a while and does a great job. Misty Marks is a girl that's coming up, who's been trained by Rodney Mack and Jazz, and a kid named Soda Pop Hendricks, who's a junior heavyweight. Very exciting wrestler, and very good basic wrestling techniques. Not just jumping around and doing spots. Just really good. Kid named Tino Valentino, who's another one of those like that. I keep thinking of all these guys. AJ Farrat, Frank Stone. We've got a lot of good talent that's coming up that we're starting to have a lot of guys that are contacting us wanting to be a part of it. We've got another Fatu. Zilla Fatu is the youngest one. He's right in line with all these other. He's kind of a little like Jacob, if you've ever watched Jacob. In fact, I saw Jacob about a week ago. So we got a lot of talent around here. And some guys we're bringing in. Kevin Nickel out of Arkansas, who's got some WWF experience. Just a lot of good guys.
Wow.
So I'm excited about it, and that's something we continue to improve is the talent level.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like it's going to be such a fantastic time when that debuts later here in 2024. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah. You can actually get some of the stuff that we've already taped on streaming right now, but it'll be on that network later on. So
Sure.
Some of the stuff that's out there right now started before I started working with them, but the last 4 or 5 months I've been very involved with writing the format. Jazz and I do most of the booking.
Sure. So was it a lot of just kind of getting this in front of more people? Because obviously, like you said, this was already an established place. So when you kind of came in and started working with a lot of this stuff, was it just getting it out to more people and getting more of that exposure to this place?
I think part my deal was really kind of changing the direction a little bit. Instead of just having matches, they were just doing content, trying to get content in for the streaming deal. Instead of doing that, now we're starting to work angles, storylines, that kind of thing, and which is my forte. That's what I like to do, and we're really starting to connect with some of that right now, and that's what we continue to do and continue to build. That's one of those things I really enjoy. And I think independent wrestling, as long if you do it that way, I think there's a place for a fan base out there that's longing for that kind of presentation, and I've always been determined to try to do that, and that's where I'm headed now, and I hope that this continues to grow, and I believe it will.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, James, I've only got 2 more questions for you before we let you go.
Okay.
But an hour of your time. Thank you again for just telling your stories.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I wanted to ask you because I think we're both going to be at the same place here soon. Hall of Fame weekend going up in Waterloo, Iowa. Such an awesome weekend coming up here in July. Why don't you talk to me just a little bit more about that? Because I've heard you in the past interviews that you're so proud of that event and what all goes up there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. If you hadn't, I would have. That's another one of those things, that just kind of happened. I got to know James Jeffries and Troy Peterson at Cauliflower Alley, I believe it was, is where I first met them, and they invited me up, and this was a few years ago, and so I went up and got to know some of the people involved. Gerald Briscoe, of course, is the head honcho of the Hall of Fame there, and I've known Gerald for quite a while, and he invited me to be a part of it and part of the board, and it's something I've just become a real passion for. It's I think one of the most pleasant weekends I've ever spent. It's kind of an intimate situation. Everything's right there in one place and are close by within 2 or 3 blocks. They have a lot of activities at the Hall of Fame, and this Hall of Fame, by the way, is the Dan Gable Museum. And if you know who Dan Gable is, I mean, probably the most famous amateur wrestler ever. And Dan is always there. He's welcome. He's one of the guys that welcome us there, and he's very receptive to the relationship that professional wrestling has with amateur wrestling, which is something that's unusual. It doesn't happen, and yet the highest profile name in amateur wrestling doing that means a lot. So we actually share a wing of that museum that's professional. And for that weekend, we have several activities at the museum, and then we have matches one night. So there's a lot of activities going on, and it's just like I said, it's a real intimate situation. You see a lot of names there, and they're all very very accessible. And it's something that I've just come to really love, and like I said, I'm very passionate about it, and I'm proud of it. We're this coming July, we're loading up for another. This is our 25th anniversary, by the way. Arn Anderson will be there as one of the honorees. Tom Pritchard will be an honoree. Don Fry, amateur honoree, and there's some others I can't talk about right now, but it's going to happen, and then they'll be coming out, in the next few weeks. But it's something that man, I tell you, it's just a wonderful, wonderful organization, and I hope people will want to come. And you can get your tickets right now. Just look it up. It's the Tragus Thez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame at the Dan Gable Museum, National Wrestling Museum.
Yeah, I'm making my plan to get my tickets. I'm planning on being there in July because it sounds like if you're a pro wrestling fan, I mean, you just need to be there.
Oh, you'll love it. You'll love it. There's going to be all kinds of activities. There's some seminars and some question answer things, and I think Gerald has volunteered me for something. I don't know. He always does, and generally at the matches, I'll usually referee at least one match. So I put the gear on for special occasions these days, and that'll be one of them.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'll tell you what, when I'm there, I'm already making my plans to be there. We're going to have to get a picture together because, man, this has just been such a cool conversation.
You bet.
Sweet.
You'll love it.
I'm so excited. Well, I'll tell you what, I got one last question before I let you go here, James.
Okay.
This whole podcast is about going above and beyond in life. And I know for a lot of these things have kind of been fallen on your lap, but you of course had to put in a lot of this work to get to where you are today. So what's one reason why you go above and beyond in life?
Oh, I think a lot of it has to do with knowing that when you are given opportunities, whether you sought them out or whether they just come to you, you have to be prepared to make the best of them. You have to be willing to do the work and put the work in to be the best you can be at whatever that is, and make the best of that situation. And I think that's always been my mindset. I had a real passion for music, and I had some success at that early on. And that kind of carried over to this. I wanted to know everything I can know about wrestling, every detail, everything. And I found out that it's impossible to know everything, but I keep learning. Even after almost 40 years of it, I still learn things. But I think that's what you do. I don't think it's about going over above and beyond. I think it's trying to reach that potential that everybody has, whatever that is. I without sounding, I don't know, without bragging, I guess, I've always felt like I was fairly intelligent and had some skills. And when I apply them in the right place, it usually pans out pretty well. And that's something in this business I've always tried to do. I've always tried to be the best I could be. And, hopefully that's been recognized a few times, and I'm just very fortunate, and it's not something that I believe is a complete act now. I'm still working on it.
Yeah. Wow. James, I tell you what, man, this has been so great. I'm so excited for July to meet you, to see James, to see the amazing event up in Waterloo. And thank you again for just being such a great guest on here.
So my pleasure, always.
I am still in shock that I was able to, number one, land this interview with James Beard, but number two, got a whole hour out of James Beard. James, if you're listening, man, thank you so much for your time. This is honestly one of the best interviews I've done so far, and I think I asked 7 questions, but that's the great thing about storytellers, right? You give them an inch and they're going to give you a mile. So that was the most awesome thing. I got to sit back and really just marvel at all the stories that he had to tell. So James, thank you so much. And thank you to you listening to this right now. You know, without you listening and tuning in every single Friday, I do not know if this podcast would be a thing. So thank you for being here, for making this podcast what it is. And man, I'm so excited for next Friday because we're going to try a little bit of something different. We're going to kind of take the normal stuff we're doing and we're going to put it aside just for 1 week to try something new. So I've been doing some research on just other podcasts that are similar to this, interview style podcasts. And I figured, you know what? Why don't we take just a 1 week break from doing interviews and we do something one-on-one? Because I know there's so many people that are kind of mystified by podcasting, right? How do you start a podcast? What equipment do I need? What social media skills do I need? So I want to do what I love to do, and that's giving out advice for free. I don't like to gatekeep any of the things that I have learned because I want other people to start creating as well. So next week, next Friday on Beyond the Broadcast, we are going to do a special Beyond the Podcast edition of Beyond the Broadcast. So we're going beyond, double beyond. I don't know how you do that unless you're going to Bed, Bath, and Beyond, but I digress. Man, I'm so excited for this. So I'm going to do my best to be a teacher in a lot of ways, and I'm going to try to intersperse these. I don't know if every other week is what we're going to do, every 2 weeks, every month, not too sure quite yet, just kind of testing the waters to see how this all works. So tune in next Friday. We got a special edition of Beyond the Broadcast called Beyond the Podcast, tips and secrets for you to start your very own podcast. So I'm so excited for that episode next week. And then right after that, we get right back into the normal stuff with some more interviews. So until that point, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me here today on Beyond the Broadcast. Make sure you show us some love, show James some love, and of course, support the podcast simply just by following us on your preferred podcast platform, following us on social media, and leaving a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. My name is Tyler Bruner, and we will see you next Friday, special edition of Beyond the Broadcast called Beyond the Podcast. All right, my friends, we will see you next Friday.